Hey folks, this is James. Welcome to another tutorial. Now that 3.0 is finally out, I'll be back to doing a few more tutorials on YouTube. This is what we're creating today. An interesting little animation. Got this sphere that's causing these bulbs to rise up and down. So it looks quite nice in Eevee. And then if you've got access to cycles, you can also do that and get some actual light into the scene from these illuminated bulbs. So without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. Here we are in a fresh scene. Just going to start by creating a couple of objects to instance. Create a cylinder. Just the default settings, and go into edit mode. Make sure you've selected all your verts and do GZ1. That'll move everything up 1 unit. Now I want to create a hole in the middle of this. So select the top and bottom faces there and do an inset and make that 0.5. And then you want to bridge those faces. You get a hole in the middle. Right, so I want to get a bevel onto this, but first shade smooth and add the bevel in. Make that harden normals, and I'm going to give that 3 segments there. Make sure you come into the normals and put in auto smooth. You see it looks correct now. So I'm just going to go back to a side view, edit mode, put a loop in the middle of that, loop cut. Now I'm going to put some materials onto this. I'm just going to put that default material on. I'm going to call that plastic. And just going to make that like a hot pink sort of colour. Roughness of 0.2. I want to add some chrome to the top half of this. So go back into edit mode, make sure you selected that whole top section, create a new material, call that chrome, make that metallic of 1 and roughness of 0.2, and make sure you hit assign. Okay, so there you go. Back out of edit mode. So we've finished with that for the moment. And the second object will be a UV sphere. Put that on radius of 0.5. Go into a side view. Edit mode. Make sure you selected all your vertices and type GZ2. It's going to move everything up 2 units. Okay, so same thing there. Make that shade smooth. And I'm going to put a new material onto that. And we're going to call this bulb. Won't worry about fiddling with the settings there for the moment. We'll get back to that. And then go back to edit mode. I want to select basically this first ring of polygons. I'm going to hit C. Selected all of them. Make sure you're in face mode. and extrude. Okay, let's try that again. C and extrude. Just go to a side view and just want that basically down on the ground plane there. So about 1.5 looks good. So I want to put a different material on here. So I'm just going to select everything. New material selection, put the chrome in there and hit assign. So if you come out of edit mode, you'll see you've got two materials on there. So this is looking a little bit nasty up here. So put on auto smooth and that solves that. We're going to call this bulb. And they're the main two objects we're going to be referencing in the geometry nodes. I'm just going to hide that as well. So let's start on the geometry nodes, create a cube, new network. Just going to call that GeoNodes and delete that first node. Okay, so the base object here is going to be a grid. So mesh primitives grid. Change that to 15 by 15 and 8 by 8. Pipe that in and you've got your grid. So I want to start instancing these objects onto that grid. So instance on points and take that cylinder you created, drag it into the network. This creates an instance of that and then the geometry into the instance. And you can see we've got a grid full of these cylinders now. So what I want to do is have a circular selection of these. So I'm going to prune out the outer ones. So the way to do that, have a look at the distance of each of those instances from the centre of the world and compare it. So what we need for that is a couple of nodes here. So vector math, you want the distance, and then input, or position. So put that in there, and the centre of the world is 0, 0, 0, so we can leave that as is. And we need to compare this to see what's going to go into the selection. So utilities, compare floats, put that into the A and type in 8 and result into the selection. So you can see it's pruned out some of these outer ones. So if I scrub this down, you can see what that's doing. It's looking at the distance and anything that's true here, so anything that's less than, we'll go in here into this Boolean socket as a true. So I can leave that on 8. Right, so now I want to do the same thing to the bulb. So I'm just going to hide the unused sockets here, just do a Control H. And I'm going to duplicate this. And do the same thing here. So grid goes into the points. And the bulb, drag that in. Geometry goes into the instance. And this less than goes into the selection. Not seeing anything yet. if I did this, you can see you got your bulbs there. So we need both of them in there, so we need to be able to join them. Join geometry. Now we've got both of them in the scene. Okay, so the next thing is to have a sphere. It's going to be rotating around over the top of these. So mesh instances, UV sphere. I can put that into the join geometry. It is there. Can't really see it, so we need to lift that up. So we need to transform and put that up 5 on the z-axis. Okay, so I'm going to make this a chrome sphere, and as you can see it is faceted. So you need to make that smooth. So set shade smooth. See, it's got rid of the faceting. And then material, set material. You can select there the chrome that was created earlier. Okay, great. Now I'm just going to put a bit of AO onto that. And make that, say, 3, 3. That looks decent. And so I need to get this sphere on the top to be circling around. So I need to use a bit of math for that. So this transform here, I'm going to be manipulating the X and the Y, just with a bit of trigonometry there. So input value, this is what's going to drive it. Utilities math. Put that on sine. And so we need access to that X. We've only got one socket. So you want combine X, Y, Z. Now I've got access to that X. But you can see that it's gone back down because that Z is now on 0 again. So put that on 5. And put that value into the X. So now if I scrub this, see it's going in a sine type movement. Basically between -1 and 1. So that's part of the way. Now we need the opposite of that, which is the cosine. So Shift D, duplicate that, cosine, same thing, value in there, and value into the Y. Now as you scrub that, you can see it's going in a circle. So I want to get this radius out further, so we need to multiply these values. So another math node there. And multiply, put that on 5. Duplicate that and do the same thing there. And now as you scrub that, you can see it's going around in a circle. So there's a couple of ways we can get this to loop. You could keyframe this, but I'm actually just going to do this with a couple more math nodes, just to make it a little bit more flexible. So if you put start on 0, end on 299. So make sure that you're in 30 frames a second. And so instead of that value going to there, I'm just going to put hash frame and another math node. So we want to divide this number here by the number of frames. So put in 300. We've got 300 frames here, the 0 to 99. So that means by the time it gets up to 300, it'll be 1. Anything in between, it'll be under 1. So now it's just a matter of putting that in there. So you can see it's starting to move, but because this is in radians, we need to remap this. One way of doing that is map range. And because this is giving a value from 0 to 1 across that whole range, we want the 0 to 1 going 0 to 360. But this is in radians, so you can either go tau, which will actually work. But if you don't understand what that is, that's basically 2 times pi. So if you hit play, see it will loop. And if this doesn't make much sense to you, the other way you can do it is just convert. So just duplicated that math node, put in 2 radians, put that in the max, and type 360. So that means that 0 to 1 range basically gets converted to 0 to 360. So if you put, say, 720 in there, it'll go around twice. Just going to make sure that playback is on frame dropping. Just going to put it back to 360. Okay, so now for the more interesting bit is to get these bulbs to rise as they get close to that sphere. So the way I'm going to do that is to look at the distance. So we've got this transform here. So you want to look at the position of that sphere relative to all of these instances. So we want a vector math. Make sure that's not connecting. And pipe that into there. I'm just going to full screen that. So this was the value going into the transform. So remember, this is the position of the sphere. And I want to change this to distance. And then input position. Put that in there. Now at the moment, that position, because this is not connected in, doesn't really mean anything to Blender. So we need this to go over here. This is the bulb. So instance, we want translate instances. Got to shift everything around. And then this value is going to move the translation on the Z. So once again, we need to split out this vector. So vector combine. Now you get access to that Z socket. So put that in there. Let's see what's going on. So you can see it is doing something, but that's obviously not the effect you're after. So we need to remap this. So that distance, we'll remap that. So map range. So it's going to be somewhere between 0 and 8, most likely. So I'll actually say 0 to 7, 3, and 0. So what that's saying is the closer that distance is to 0, more likely it's going to be a maximum of 3. So look at that in a side view. See, when it's away from that maximum distance, they don't move at all. And then they're rising within a certain threshold. So if I played with this value, I can either get all of them rising or only a very few. And if you put that up, they'll rise even higher. But then they're going through the sphere. So 0 to 7, 3 to 0. Okay, so that's most of it. Now I want to do something with the shader. So shader editor. Select that bulb and make sure you're on the bulb. I'm going to edit this material. So I'm going to look at the height of these bulbs and get that to drive the colour and the emission. So we've got input and object info. So we've got a location here. So we want to split this out to just look at the Z axis. So converter, separate X, Y, Z. And this is what we're after here, the Z. So run that through our color ramp. So Z goes into the factor and the color goes into the base color. And you can see it's now updated. Let's change the roughness to 0.2. And also I want to connect that color to the emission color. Put the strength of the emission on 10. Now if you hit play, you see as they rise up, they get to that maximum white value. As they drop back down, they go to the black. Okay, great. So now I just want to put a floor on there and we're pretty much done. So I want to set up a cyclorama, which is just a way of getting a floor with a curving edge on it. So one way of doing that is to put down a cube and make that about 50. Looks good. And now I'm just going to edit that. So edit mode. So for a start, I want to put that bottom part basically up to the ground plane there. Okay, so as you can see, that's now on 0. Then I want to put a bevel on this. So select everything, Control B, a bevel, 5 and 10 segments. And then I really just want to get rid of that top. So select everything and delete the vertices. So this is what you're left with. Let's make that shade smooth. Is that you always get a backdrop there. It's actually not large enough, so I'm going to make that a little bit larger. So the origin is in the center. And S2. I'm just going to put a material under that. So new material, I'm going to call that floor. Base color, about 50% grey. And roughness on 0.2. Come back to Eevee, put screen space reflections on. As you can see, that's looking a lot nicer. And that's pretty much done. I'm just going to put a camera in the scene. So camera, go to the camera view and make sure you've got lock camera to view on and just frame that up. Of course, we want some depth of field on this. Also going to make the viewport, I can never pronounce this thing, but the pass part out, put that on 1, just so you don't get anything outside of the frame there. And depth of field, make that quite shallow. And just scrub that along till you get the front of the scene. Probably should be about 18. So there's the final scene. So as usual, I'll have the project file available for subscribers on my Patreon, where I'm also posting a lot of other tutorials and project files. So that wraps this up. Thanks for watching.